Ole Miss has done it again. Big portal move for Lane Kiffin and the Rebels. Steven Willis, Locked On Ole Miss, joining me here on the show. I had Chris Hardie as the probably best available defensive lineman. Maybe not the top overall guy in the portal. Ole Miss got him earlier in the cycle, and Walter Nolan transferring from Texas A&M. But this is a pretty notable pickup here, Steven. This guy was, I'm almost hilariously productive last year playing in Conference USA. What do you make of Chris Hardie joining that Rebels defensive line?
I think he makes the defensive line more versatile. You can do different stuff. You have Princely Amon Mielen to go along with Jared Ivey, and then you add this person here. You can move Ivey down there. All of a sudden, the defensive line can turn into a little bit of a Voltron a little bit, depending on what you need to do. And you can kind of fill it up to your needs as you see fit. I mean, it's pretty cool. I like Chris Hardie. Him at Jacksonville State, he had 8.5 sacks, 16.5 tackles for loss, and only 4 quarterback hurries, which it tells me is like, hey, this is a guy that got home whenever he got close. It wasn't something where he almost got to the quarterback. And Chris Hardie, believe it or not, had as many sacks against SEC teams as Tyler Barron.
Which is a pretty impressive stat in and of itself. Now, I'm not expecting him to come into the SEC and replicate those numbers, but this is a guy who feels like he might be the second or third best defensive line player for Ole Miss this year. Where do you put Ole Miss's defensive line with him at the helm compared to the rest of the SEC?
Compared to the rest of the SEC, like Georgia's always going to have a bunch of animals at defensive line. Texas is good. Alabama's always going to be good. Jaheim Otis is a really good football player. I figure somewhere in that top tier, though. Walter Nolan is somebody that you just can't trifle with. Like I said, Princely Amon Mielen is potentially a top half to mid-level first-round draft pick. Jared Ivey was the MVP of the Peach Bowl, and then you have J.J. Pegues, who just quietly is their all-versatile short yardage running back because he's so athletic. So I really like this defensive line group. And then when you look at like Chris Pupal at linebacker and the other linebackers that they have, this front seven has a chance to be different from Ole Miss teams of the past. Whenever you think of Ole Miss the last couple of years, it was all offense and just trying to outscore people. But now all of a sudden those 50 to 48 games and those 50 to 40 games, they're 50 to 20 games. And if that happens, it's going to look a whole lot differently.
Ole Miss, as you mentioned, has not had a sparkling defensive reputation over the last couple of years, shall we say. How do you feel with not just Hardie, but the rest of the guys in there and the entire transfer portal class writ large for Ole Miss defensively? How do you feel they're going to be different in 2024?
Well, last year they took a step defensively because they were dominant against bad to mid offenses. Unless you had super athletes on offense like Georgia, like LSU, those guys could win one-on-ones with guys. The defensive scheme just completely shut people down. And after that Georgia game, after that LSU game, after a little bit that Texas A&M game, Pete Golding realized that, hey, we need guys that can match up with those guys. We need to win one-on-ones defensively. If that happens, our scheme's going to be exactly what we want it to be. And they use the transfer portal to make it happen. After the Georgia game, Lane Kiffin, the Grove Collective, everybody sat down and said, hey, we need guys that look like that. If we want to beat them, we need to look like that. And they set upon a plan right after that Georgia game to get Princely Amon Mielen, like Walter Nolan, like those type players that are really big, really athletic guys. If you even look at the offensive line, like Diego Pounds, just a huge man. Nate Kalepo from Washington, a huge man. They wanted to make the lines on both lines of the scrimmage look like elite programs like Georgia, like Washington a year ago, like those guys. And I think the early returns that they're in pretty good shape. Now we have to see on the field, they have to mesh together. They have to win games. But luckily, if you look at Ole Miss's schedule, they've got 6 games to kind of work our way up into this like thing before they have to go down to Baton Rouge. And then Baton Rouge obviously is going to be a different animal, but you do have 6 games to get right at the beginning of the season.
The other transfer Ole Miss got recently was at the running back position. Of course, Quinshon Judkins no longer a part of Ole Miss's repertoire. He's up at Ohio State. But Rashad Amos, a guy who had transferred to Colorado, and then he didn't. And Ole Miss said, no, you want to come down here because Colorado's improved, but Ole Miss is a playoff contender. Of course, they're one of the SEC teams favored to make it this year. And I think Ole Miss is absolutely a playoff caliber team. But what do you make of the Amos addition to the backfield to join Jackson Dart and company?
Well, Rashad Amos was necessary because of all of the weirdness happening around Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, the New Mexico transfer that was committed to Arizona. Then he was committed to Ole Miss and ended up, I think he enrolled at Arizona, but there was questions about his eligibility. And you couldn't really, it was all like, it really felt like a situation to where if you're an Ole Miss fan and you understand the scar tissue, you were just waiting on, it was like, hey, we'll have Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. And then August 20th, the NCAA shows up and says, this guy's ineligible. You can't play him. That's kind of what they were expecting to happen. And Ole Miss needed to protect themselves against that, honestly. And they went out and got a Rashad Amos, a 235-pound running back, 6'2". Somebody at Miami of Ohio ran for over 1,000 yards, ran for like 180 yards in their bowl game. He is a really good big running back. So if you want to look at the three running backs that are slated to probably get the majority of the carries this season, you have Ulysses Bentley IV, who is just an electricity, the electric factory, you might say. Henry Parrish coming back to Ole Miss. He's Mr. Reliable at running back. And then now you have your thumper in Rashad Amos. And this running back game is going to look a lot like it did in 2021 and 2020, whenever Ole Miss had the three-headed monster with Matt Corral. It's going to look a lot like that, but these are some talented dudes. And I'm really curious to kind of see them grow together. Because between Bentley and Parrish and Amos, they have a chance to be a pretty formidable backfield.
We're less than 100 days away from the season in which Lane Kiffin, not entirely, but largely through the transfer portal and also key returners like Jackson Dart, have they've set themselves up for some pretty high hopes. I have high hopes for them. I've been a fan of Ole Miss's offseason. It's hard to not be, frankly, but the entire time since I've been hosting this show. And what do you make of the portal class as a whole? Lane Kiffin has been dubbed the portal king, and he's got the number one portal class in the 24/7 cycle in the class of 2024. How has he used the transfer portal to set the stage for this upcoming season?
He's used the transfer portal better than anybody else in college football. And that's over the last few years. That's not just this year. When you look at it, you have Jackson Dart, transfer from USC. You have Ulysses Bentley IV, transfer from SMU. Henry Parrish Jr., transfer from Miami. Rashad Amos, transfer from Miami, Ohio. Trey Harris, transfer from Louisiana Tech. Juice Wells, transfer from South Carolina. The offensive line, transfers all over the place. The defense has been completely rebuilt with transfers. If Ole Miss makes the playoff and makes a run, this not only turns college football on its head, but it turns what it takes to make a roster on its head. If you have a quarterback on your team that's experienced, that can be a leader of your team, then it just doesn't matter if they're all transfers. Ole Miss is doing at a 2.0 level what everybody criticized Bill Snyder for doing at Kansas State in 2000, when he was recruiting JUCO players and half of his class, 3/4 of his class were Kansas JUCOs. They said, oh, no, Kansas State can't win doing this. Bill Snyder's obviously just kind of smoke and mirrors. This is the 2.0 version of that. And if Lane Kiffin does what I think he is going to do this year, it's going to turn college football on its head.
That was an exquisite piece of college football history right there. That's why we bring him on. Steven Willis, Locked on Ole Miss. Check him out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Look at the merch he's got rolling. The mic cover, the sweatshirt. He's got absolutely everything you need for the Rebels. Steven, thanks as always.
Oh, anytime, buddy.
This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.